Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
So now as we begin corporate earnings season for those companies that are publicly traded and do publicly report their results, it will be a significant moment that allows us to peer into the near term of the economic health and just general business. It is important because it informs us and we can forecast, to some degree, commercial activity for the next year or so. Thank you for supporting the longest running and the most widely watched program on Carolina business policy and public affairs. I am Chris William, and on this week's program, as always, we will dive a bit deeper below the headlines and analyze those things that are most important to us in the region. And joining us later on this program, hospitality executive and Extended Stay America CEO, Jonathan Halkyard.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Sarah House of Wells Fargo Securities, Hakan Ozmen of Prysmian Group North America, and special guest Jonathan Halkyard, CEO of Extended Stay America.
Hello, welcome to our program. Sarah, good to have you here. Hakan, welcome to both of you. First time. As Don, our senior producer, says, we're not going to tell you what we do to first-timers, but you'll just have to wait and see. I'm kidding. Dr. House, let's start with this idea. I don't want to say a trade war. You know, this idea that the Trump administration has started a dialogue that there will be increased tariffs, of course, and then China has responded, and the world is now watching with bated breath. How would you handicap that there could be real trade and tariff prohibition going on?
Well, I think it's likely that we'll see some sort of tariffs go into effect, specifically against China. So right now, it's important to note that we haven't actually seen a lot go into effect. It's been proposed. There's a comment period, and then the president has about 6 months to actually enact that. And so a lot of this might be just talk for now, and so some of it could get dialed back. But no doubt we've seen the tensions flare up, which has certainly some risks of seeing greater inflation here in the U.S., as well as just hitting overall growth in terms of consumers' real purchasing power.
You know, is this a dialogue that does need to happen, Sarah? In other words, does there need to be some level of the playing field between China and the U.S. when it comes to international trade?
Yes, I think that's pretty widely agreed upon, that there has been some cheating, might be a little bit strong, but definitely maybe China taking advantage of the global trading system. And so I think that it's pretty widely agreed upon that there does need to be some reckoning in terms of the playing field.
Hakan, how do you come down on this issue when you hear the threat of trade and tariffs from both sides of the globe? What goes through your mind?
Trade wars are always danger for the industries until it settles and there is an equilibrium. We are facing currently some issues because of the additional tariffs on aluminum and steel. And on top, there are some sanctions versus the Russian government. If you put both together, then the aluminum, let's say, prices went up, the Midwest premiums went up, and the industry is facing some trouble finding also some material. So I think until it settles and there are going to be some investments which is going to cover these trade wars, or when it's going to be balanced, then it's good. But until that time, it's going to be a very big turbulence for the industry.
So do you think the chilling effect of just the possibility of this being escalating or becoming more inflamed is enough to hold off any capital investment?
I think definitely people are watching and waiting until these tariffs are going to happen, and there are some threats, and sometimes we threaten and then we change our mind. So no one is going to invest until it is going to really happening.
More certainly.
So, and currently there is a little bit uncertainty, and people are watching definitely before investments.
The U.S. Central Bank, Sarah, has said a couple things about this, about the trade rhetoric going on, and that is they're concerned about it from the point of view of rising prices, in other words, cost inflation, and then rising interest rates. How much do you think that that could materialize?
So I think that the pass-through to overall consumer inflation, which is what the Fed really benchmarks their decisions against, I think that's still likely to be rather muted. So you have to remember that about 2/3 of the U.S. economy is services. And so the impact that we're likely to see, even as companies like Hakan's are facing higher input costs in steel and aluminum, are likely to be rather modest in the overall inflation numbers. But still, when we're talking about inflation struggling to get to 2%, I mean, every tenth matters, and so that could impact what the Fed is forced to do in terms of raising rates if they're holding the line on their inflation mandate.
What are not just what is your company talking about internally around this trade and tariff possibility of escalation of hostilities, if you will, but Hakan, what are your customers saying to you about this?
Oh, definitely. Our customers are very much concerned about, especially they are concerned about material availability because they have some projects that they have started already.
Are they sourcing in the U.S. or outside the U.S.?
For the specific materials, unfortunately, there is not enough source from inside the U.S. and you have to import. And therefore, they are a little bit concerned, and they want to have security of their material, and they are calling us to have that security. They are not very much concerned about the price war in the short term, in the long term, but in the short term, they are going to be affected also from the pricing perspective.
If the Trump administration, Sarah, does revisit the idea of rejoining the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, would that go a long way in alleviating any fears of further escalation around a trade conflict?
I think it would help, particularly in light that the TPP really did update a lot of the rules around some of the intellectual property concerns. That's been a concern of the current administration. So that could take some of the edge off. But at the same time, China's not a part of TPP. So that might not fully alleviate the concerns that the administration has, particularly against China.
We have a couple minutes left before we bring our guest out. Now, I want to come to this idea that at NC State, there's an organization called the Emerging Issues Institute, Emerging Issues Forum they have every year. And one of the questions they asked, a key question was, what are you concerned about most? And the answer they got back the most was the idea of a rural-urban divide. And I know you've both heard that concept, maybe in a couple different ways. And let me overlay on top of the rural-urban divide a couple of other things, and that is, Hakan, I'm looking at you right now about broadband infrastructure in those rural areas, and that there's not enough of that there's not enough high-speed internet access in rural areas. And Sarah, there's also this concern that the millennials, or the next generation of leadership, is congealing in city centers in the urban core. So those two dynamics have really caused even more concern about the rural-urban. Is this rural-urban concern a real, I don't want to say a real issue, Sarah, but is it getting more press than it needs? Is it bona fide? Are we not talking about it enough? How would you come down?
I think looking at the economic data and the numbers and just looking at job growth in terms of what we see in some of the Carolinas major metro areas versus even some of the smaller metropolitan areas, let alone the truly rural areas in the Carolinas, I think you definitely are seeing that divide. And so I think it does warrant a lot of attention in terms of just the growth and opportunities. And it's tough for a lot of households maybe in some of those rural areas where you aren't maybe seeing the job growth. It can be expensive to move even to those bigger metropolitan areas, but for young people it's a little easier on them where they are more mobile, and so you do see that gravitational pull towards towards the metropolitan areas, which can exacerbate these issues and further job growth down the line.
Hakan, the statistical evidence on the internet access, broadband access in rural areas is about 20% of folks don't have that access.
Yeah.
Is 20% really that prohibitive to growth in the rural areas? Would that last mile or that last 20%, would it make a difference?
Definitely, it makes a difference. There are some countries like Australia which made some big projects, national broadband network, to bring to the extra mile, the investments. And US, we were doing that also 5 years ago, but the industry has developed so fast that the 4Gs have become now 5G. 5G, we are talking, the industry has changed, the technology has changed so fast that the infrastructure became not enough also with the existing changes that are happening. So therefore, I feel if you really want to grow in these areas, then you have to do more investments. But now in these days, I mean, for the applications that you can create, you don't need to be in the cities. But if you don't have that opportunity to have the connection, then you won't be able to be part of the industry that is developing everywhere.
So where's the barrier to get that 100% penetration in the rural
I mean,
areas?
it's, I think, investments first.
Is that public? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is that public investment, private investment? What
it is public and private investment. You have to be able to get the return from the applications, from the users' perspective. And once the, you don't have that payback from the subscribers, then you don't tend to invest. Therefore, I think it becomes more of a public problem than it is a private problem. So, because you need to have governments to incentivize, to help to go to these extra miles. And if this is going to happen, definitely, I mean, it will create additional jobs because you don't need to be in any place anymore to create an industry or a business. We see many companies that are, in 3 months, they become billion-dollar companies, unicorns. So in order to reach that, you don't need to be in a city.
Thank you, Hakan. Thanks, Sarah. Stay with us. Coming up on our program next week, very interesting. If you spent any time in Western North Carolina, or if you like craft beer, then you're going to know the name, Highland Brewing. Highland Brewing was started by a gentleman named Oscar Wong in Asheville. His daughter, the president and CEO, Leah Ashburn, will join us next week on this program talking about why they are the largest native North Carolina brewer. And then in 2 weeks, many people say that the ACC is the premier conference in this country. Of course, many of those people live in the ACC footprint. John Swafford, the commissioner of the ACC, will again be on our program as well. When someone says hotel, most people think about the Westin, the Hilton, the Hampton Inn, the Ritz, et cetera, et cetera. But Extended Stay America lives in that hospitality space between the short-term high-quality overnight stays and the longer-term affordable options. With over 600 hotels across this country, 70,000 rooms or so, they offer a different product in the hospitality business, but considering the seismic disruptors like Airbnb, VRBO, et cetera, how does Extended Stay strategize, and how do they make sure that they are relevant and affordable? Joining us now is Extended Stay Chief Executive Officer Jonathan Halkyard.
Good.
I was corrected because I apologize, Jonathan, but we're glad to have you on the program.
Thanks.
Jonathan, you know Disruptors, the founder of your company, Wayne Huizenga, down in Florida, Blockbuster, AutoNation, Extended Stay America was a disruptor. And now in your business, not now, but you Airbnb, VRBO. How do you think about where you want to take Extended Stay, knowing very well that this business that you're in is tough to be competitive?
Yeah, and it is important to note that our company, Extended Stay America, originally was a disruptor in a way. Huizenga essentially invented the extended stay industry. These new entrants are a big deal in the hotel business, and really because what they've disrupted is the supply. It used to be that hotel demand and hotel supply were relatively constant, could be forecasted, and hotel companies benefited from those periods of very strong demand around special events and the rest. And one of the areas where Airbnb and VRBO have had a real impact is around those needle peaks of demand where they all of a sudden bring a lot of supply into a market. And it really takes away some of the pricing power of the hotels during those periods of time. So it's really required all of the hotels to get more creative about the way that they're driving their business. For Extended Stay America, you know, our demand drivers are different. Our customers are primarily business travelers who are staying for anywhere from 5 days up to a few months. We have a direct sales force which calls directly on these companies to place their people on site for their projects and whatnot. So for the time being, Airbnb and VRBO haven't really gone after those types of customers. It's kind of hard to buy their product for a couple of months at a time. And they also tend to be based in urban areas where our demand drivers, like office parks and transportation centers, medical facilities, and the rest, are typically not in those urban centers, and that's where our customers typically like to be.
So do you end up, when you look to co-locate to one of those centers of influence for business, is it an easier proposition than it would be for a hotel that has to win over maybe a residential neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean, the more traditional hotels like the ones you mentioned at the Open, like Hampton Inn and Hilton and the rest, first of all, a lot of them will cater towards leisure travelers as well as business travelers, and they're in the transient business, 1 or 2 nights, competing right up against what Airbnb might offer for a couple of nights. So we just don't find ourselves really in that same competitive set.
Yeah, okay. Sarah?
Sure. So by the macroeconomic indicators, we're seeing what can be described as a pretty tight labor market these days. Are you guys having trouble either finding workers or retaining existing workers in light of the labor market conditions? And if so, what are you doing about it?
Yeah, we certainly are in certain regions, primarily out in California and to a lesser extent up in the Northeast. Now, one mitigating factor for us is we do not have a very high labor input into our operations. We only offer weekly housekeeping because our customers are there for a few weeks at a time. We don't have restaurants or food and beverage. So it's a fairly light labor component compared to other hotel companies. In those areas where we are facing those kinds of labor challenges, we just have to work very hard to retain the people that we find. Now, we have multiple hotels within certain cities, and so one of the ways in which we compete with other options for these folks is to provide them with full-time hours, and we can do that oftentimes by moving our housekeepers between different hotels over the course of a week. In some cases, we've dealt with it by wage increases. This year, we'll probably see wage increases system-wide of 3 to 4%, but it's 5 or 6% in some markets. But overall for the company, it's not as large a component of our cost structure.
So as a quick follow-up, as former CFO of the company, when you hear 5 to 6% or 3 to 4% wage increase, does that make you wince?
It doesn't make me wince simply because it's not as large a part of our overall cost structure as it might be in other businesses. It's interesting, actually, one of our largest costs is utility expense for our businesses. So we're as tuned into energy efficiency as we are labor costs, for example.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So we are operating also in the Carolinas, and we see that Carolinas is getting more and more investments, and we are seeing some dynamic changes. Being headquartered in Charlotte in the Carolinas, what do you see from your business perspective, the good parts and the bad parts of being in, more the good parts of being in Carolina?
In the Carolinas? Well, we are, as you noted, we're headquartered in Charlotte, but we have 41 hotels across North and South Carolina, and everywhere from Charleston to Asheville to Raleigh. We were founded in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and moved to Charlotte just about 5 years ago. We're very enthusiastic about the Carolinas for our new development. One of our main activities over the next several years is developing new hotels. And there's really 2 components to being able to do that. The first is having the demand drivers and the labor pool and such to satisfy that investment. And the second is a business and a political environment that enables us to acquire the real estate, get the zoning, and get under construction quickly. And we like we like the environment in the Carolinas, across North and South Carolina, for all of those factors.
In Bluffton, South Carolina, you're proposing to build, and there has been some pushback from the neighborhood there. Is that typical when you look at a spot or you pick out a location that you'll get a neighborhood to say, you know, we don't mind it, but not in our backyard?
We get a little bit of that, and it's too bad, and I don't think it's right. And in Bluffton, it's correct that that has come up. You know, we provide a really important service for local economies that are growing. What drives our business is business creation. It is construction, it's pre-opening, training, relocation. Those are the reasons people use our hotels. We're often co-located with Hampton Inns and Holiday Inn Expresses and Sheraton and the rest. And yet we're a very different product, but we think a very important product for a local economy. So you know, we want to make that case, and it doesn't come up everywhere, but occasionally it does, and it's a case that we're happy to make.
Do you find yourself, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, Jonathan, but do you find yourself winning that argument more than not, once you lay it out that way?
Well, it's been a while since our company has developed new hotels.
Okay.
And so I think time will tell on that.
Yeah.
But I've been through this with our developers, and you know, we're working with the folks down in Bluffton, but we really believe we have a good case. We think we have a very important mission. We're enabling people to really make their lives better through not only working with us, but also pursuing their career goals, whether it be associated with a relocation or something like that. So we think we have a good story to tell.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you say you haven't been developing new hotels in a while. So what's changed more recently? Is it just the broader economic backdrop, or is it things like the new tax deal allowing you to step up investment?
Most of it has been related to our own company's development. Our company, is we noted, was founded about 20 years ago and really grew through the 2000s largely through acquisition. There were a number of copycat hotel brands that our company acquired and consolidated to build our 625 hotel portfolio. We had multiple brands. We've consolidated those under the one Extended Stay America brand. We took the company public about 3.5 years ago, and we are now beginning the process of adding new hotels. Now, that's against an economic backdrop that we think is very constructive, not only in hotels generally, but in our segment specifically. Really, all of the growth in the hotel business is in the upscale, let's call it $150 a night or higher, and transient hotels, whereas we, in our segment, extended stay at a medium price, there's almost no supply growth. So we think it's a positive economic backdrop.
Okay.
You have an interesting business proposition, actually, and I don't see it very much all around the world. It's more specific in the US. Do you think to export that business model into other countries?
Yes, you know, our priority right now is certainly in the United States. We had 3 hotels in Canada, which we divested about 6 months ago. There are similar concepts in the UK and in Europe. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar. And I only see it growing, not only in this country but internationally. You know, we're at this interesting intersection of two macroeconomic factors. One is that companies are increasingly able to compete for business far away from their home operations, and secondly, workers are increasingly unwilling to move because of dual careers, aging parents, children in school, and the rest. And so the number of people who are now working in one place and living in another for a long period of time, it's an astonishing number. And we believe our company sits at the intersection of that, not only in this country, but in other countries. So I am optimistic we'll be able to grow internationally at some point.
We've got about a minute left, Jonathan. In this idea, I want to come back to laborers and immigration. How closely do you watch the debate around immigration in this country, and especially given a couple quick things? H-2B visas for the second year, very restrictive, only 60,000 for the entire nation, which is amazing. And then the other part of the DACA debate and this and that. Does immigration, is it something that's really on your radar?
It's not really on our radar from a business perspective. It certainly is in terms of the general economic outlook
Okay.
and the level of uncertainty that surrounds the business outlook in general. Our business is dependent upon business creation and investment. And so to the extent that there's certainty in the economic environment, that there is investment, that certainly affects our business.
Okay, thank you. Do you stay in the hotels?
Yes, I do.
And you said it with a smile. It's a good sign.
Yeah.
Jonathan, thank you for being on the program.
My pleasure.
Best of
Thank
luck
you.
going forward.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Hakan as well. Thank you. Good to have you on the program. Please come back. We don't, first timers, and I say that not like it's a bad thing, but I don't know how you both got biased without inviting you. But Hakan, good to have you here.
Thank you.
Sarah, good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching our program. If you have any questions or comments, please, carolinabusinessreview.org. Watch shows, make comments, but generally, thank you for being a supporter of this program. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Have a good weekend. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.